We already covered the big debate in the previous video, which I still think has a lot of good talking points for chapter 29, but since the next license is guaranteed to be a big license, I wanted to cover Pennywise's licensing situation in a separate video. I found a lot of new information on this license, and I'd like to argue that this license could actually be possible for chapter 29. While Jason and Alien seem to be the frontrunners, Pennywise definitely still has a shot at being this license. Hey everyone, it's Schmuckles, don't mind my hair shook up. Today we're going to talk about the possibility of Pennywise being chapter 29 in Dead by Daylight. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. I'm also live right now on Twitch streaming Dead by Daylight, link for that in the description below. If you want to be up to date on theories, speculations, and licensing details, definitely join my Discord where we have those kinds of conversations about every single license all the time. Link for my Discord in the description below. The big talking point for Pennywise is who owns the video game licensing rights. Is it Warner Bros. Or Stephen King or both? I saw that back in 2017, Stephen King was taking moves to reclaim the rights to some of his classic novels. He's pretty much getting the rights back from some of his classic books away from the movie studios. This article claimed that he was getting the rights back to I think 6 different properties, none of which were It. However, according to the Copyright Office record, Stephen King took action in 2017 on the It franchise. Based on the information provided on the notice on the copyright website, it appears that Stephen King exercised the termination right under the 17 USC section 203 for the title It. This notice indicates that Stephen King served a notice of termination on Warner Bros. Television. The title listed here is It/Reg TX 1912654. I was wondering if this was definitely referring to the It franchise and not something else. I'm not a lawyer, but it does seem highly likely that this is referring to the It franchise, and I'll explain why. So the notice of termination of grant under 17 USC section 203 is a legal provision that grants authors the right to terminate certain transfers or licenses of copyright 35 years after the initial release of the original book. So when Stephen King's novel It was published on September 15, 1986, he likely entered into agreements with Warner Bros. And granted them certain rights over the copyrighted work, including the character Pennywise. So in the case of It, the termination window opened on September 15, 2020, 34 years after the novel's release. To exercise the termination right, Stephen King served a notice of termination on September 15, 2020, informing relevant parties, in this case Warner Bros. Television, of his intent to terminate the previous grants or licenses. The termination became effective 2 years after the notice was served, which means that on September 16, 2022, Stephen King's termination of the previous grants were completed. This was 36 years after the book's release, not 35, so for whatever reason, Stephen King waited an extra year to get the ball rolling. This means that Stephen King, as the author of the original book, It, has reclaimed the rights to the copyrighted material after the termination became effective. As a result, Stephen King would now have the opportunity to renegotiate with movie studios or enter into new licensing agreements with all of those characters, including Pennywise. And this was all as of September 16, 2022. So technically, this only states that Stephen King has exercised the right for the termination of the work It, which includes the character Pennywise. It doesn't specifically mention the video game licensing rights. The termination right exercised here allows the author to terminate certain transfers or licenses of their copyrighted work. In this case, Stephen King had terminated a grant made by Warner Bros. Television. Whether now Stephen King owns the video game licensing rights to Pennywise would depend on the details of that original grant and agreements related to the character. The termination just means that rights previously held by Warner Bros. Would revert to Stephen King, but it's not explicitly stated here whether video game licensing rights were a part of that original grant. We have some conflicting information here because in my Shining licensing video, I was talking about the fact if the movie studios adapt a book into a movie, they now inherit the rights to those characters, and it's almost like a second license. It seems like the specific details of the rights and agreements can vary depending on the contracts and negotiations involved. In Stephen King's It and the character Pennywise, the movie adaptations would involve agreements between Stephen King and Warner Bros. Television. And these agreements would outline the scope of the rights granted to Warner Bros. For that movie adaptation. September 16, 2022 marks the date that Stephen King inherited the rights back from It. It's possible for Warner Bros. To license the character Pennywise into Dead by Daylight before September 16, 2022, even if the content featuring Pennywise is not officially released until August 2023. An agreement like that could have been negotiated and finalized before September 16, 2022, granting Dead by Daylight the rights to use Pennywise in their game. And the fact that the content featuring Pennywise is released later, say August 2023, would not affect the validity of any license if it was already agreed upon and executed before that termination date. So in this hypothetical scenario, if Stephen King exercised the termination right and inherited the rights to Pennywise on September 16, 2022, the license could have been granted to Dead by Daylight and would remain valid and actually would be through Warner Bros. As long as Dead by Daylight were to abide by the terms in that that specific licensing agreement, they'd be able to continue with Pennywise in the game, and the content featuring the character could be released as planned. One example of this is the Welcome to Derry show. On April 12, 2023, Max announced that the show is coming to Max in 24. We first heard of the developments of the show being developed on March 30th, 2022. It was confirmed that Warner Bros. Television is the studio behind the project. They likely pulled the trigger on the show so it could be established before they lost the license later that year. The fact that Warner Bros. Was facing a termination date may have motivated them to change their minds about Pennywise and DBD. This way they could make as much money as possible before the loss of that license. And this is exactly what happened with the Pinhead license. Larry Zerner refers to this window as the use it or lose it window. The Pinhead license in Dead by Daylight was licensed by Park Avenue Entertainment. And look at this Pinhead copyright at the end of the DBD trailer. It's from Park Avenue Entertainment in 2021, which means Behavior snatched this license from Park Avenue Entertainment before Clive Barker recaptured the rights to the character, as well as the original film on December 19, 2021. So Park Avenue Entertainment quickly made a deal with Behavior sometime before December 19, 2021, and the Pinhead chapter was revealed on August 17, 2021. Let's just say hypothetically that Pennywise is chapter 29. Warner Bros. Would have needed to make a deal with Behavior before September 16, 2022. Stephen King filed for the termination date on September 15, 2020. So between September 2020 and September 2022, Warner Bros. Would have been aware of the loss of the license and would have been more motivated to use it. In this time window on September 7, 2021, Matthew Cote said this in an interview.
Over the last 5-6 years almost, people have asked me personally, like, who would you like to see in DBD? And it's always kind of a touchy subject because I don't want to, talk about something if I know it's coming in 2 weeks or even in 6 months. I don't want to give information that I shouldn't, but Pinhead has always been one that I got back to even early on. Like I remember in the first few months of the game.
So well before this interview, years ago, Matthew Cote said that Pennywise was his dream license for Dead by Daylight. And then on September 7, 2021, Cote said he can't mention upcoming killers. And then on October 5, 2021, The King interviewed Matthew Cote, and Cote said this when asked about his dream license for Dead by Daylight.
What is your personal wish list for what's to come into DBD? This is obviously the museum right now. You guys have so much things. Game development aside, your personal, like, I want this. It can even be rubber.
You don't have to worry about any of the loopholes.
Next you're going to tell me it's going to be off the record or something. But no. I can't. Like, anything that is even remotely possible at this point is impossible for me to discuss. Okay. Unfortunately. What I can say is I would really like to see some of our original characters come into other games.
So these dates, October 7th, 2021 and October 5th, 2021, are within the time range that Warner Bros. Is aware that King is reclaiming the rights to the character Pennywise. So do we think that during that time window, at the end of 2021, Matthew Cote was working on getting the rights to the character Pennywise through Warner Bros. During their use it or lose it window? Let me know down in the comments below. The alternative is for Behavior to have licensed the character Pennywise through Stephen King after that date, September 16, 2022. The licensing rights for the character Pennywise from the movie It in 2017 were held by Warner Bros. Before, but those rights were reverted back to Stephen King under the Section 203. As a result, after that date, Warner Bros. Would no longer have the authority to license Pennywise into other projects, including a Dead by Daylight chapter. So if this were the case, do we think that Stephen King would be okay with sharing Pennywise's license with Dead by Daylight? Stephen King has occasionally written articles and columns for Entertainment Weekly. Back in 2008, he shared his opinion on video games in an article. He said, "I'm no fan of video games, pretty much gave them up in the late 70s or early 80s when my kids used to beat me regularly at Pitfall. Nope, video games are not my thing, nor am I some kind of raving political nutcase." But when I heard about the HB 1423, which happens to be a bill pending in Massachusetts state legislature, I still hit the roof. HB 1423 would restrict or outright ban the sale of violent video games to anyone under the age of 18. Based on this article, Stephen King doesn't particularly like video games, but he also didn't advocate for HB 1423. He disagreed for this bill, which seeks to outright ban the sale of violent video games to anyone under the age of 18. Stephen King pretty much argued against politicians taking it upon themselves to parent children, and believes that parents should be responsible for monitoring and controlling their children and what kind of media they consume. Based on all of this information, do you think that Behavior could have licensed Pennywise into DBD for Chapter 29? It seems like that termination date could have encouraged Warner Bros. To use that license while they still could have. I'd have to say that this timeline is pretty compelling, and I now have to put Pennywise over FNAF when trying to predict which killers are most likely for Chapter 29. Those FNAF leaks that we talked about in the previous video are pretty much confirmed to be fake. The screenshots are from Blender and anyone could have made those. But more importantly, Dweet actually confirmed to me on Twitter that all of those leaks are fake. That includes the screenshots as well as the alleged leaked Springtrap power. And let us not forget that a Behavior dev addressed FNAF speculations about their Twitter profile recently. This was just days before they announced that big licenses were coming into the game as well. I don't think they would have done that if FNAF was one of those 2 licenses. Let me know your top picks for the next license in the comment section below. This is my list right here. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. The teaser week is right around the corner, so make sure you have notifications on if you want to be up to date with all the Dead by Daylight teasers and speculations. We're going to analyze these teasers next week in correspondence with the information that we have on every single license. Also a reminder that I'm live on Twitch right now streaming DBD, link for that in the description below. That does it for this video. Goodbye.